and the future of local development. First, just a couple housekeeping items. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with your name and organization. I know folks are calling in from all over the world here, and we have our esteemed panelists calling in from around the world. So please let us know who you are and where you're from. If you have any technical difficulties, don't hesitate to just direct those comments to our support staff here. And then if you want to share any messages to all, please don't hesitate. We have an opportunity to do question and answers later on in the session. So please feel free to use the question and answer function here in Zoom and upvote those that you're particularly interested in. And as you heard, the webinar is being recorded and will be shared on our OECD Local Development Forum website. So for those of you who have friends that were not able to join today, yeah, there's an opportunity to listen in later. So just a couple words to kick off before I hand it over to Jeff Finkel, who's going to lead our esteemed panel here today. So just to note that this webinar is part of a series of events that we're doing to mark the 40th anniversary of the Local Employment and Economic Development Program here at the OECD. It was created back in 1982 because governments felt they had to come together and learn from what are the innovative approaches to ensure local job creation in all communities. So 40 years later, we see that there are lots of ongoing challenges that we all need to try and confront and face together, both from the public and private sector. So the forum is here and is open as a way to exchange. It's really a gateway between local practitioners and the OECD community to really get your ideas and feedback and vice versa, share OECD work. And I'll just flag that for those who enjoyed today's session, there will also be an in-person event in Cork, Ireland in mid-June, where we'll have lots of exciting panels in person, and our colleagues will share that info in the chat so you can learn more about it. So just a few very brief comments, because we really want to get to the international experiences of the colleagues here today. And just to say really that, we're, as part of this 40th anniversary, trying to get a grasp with the future of local development and what we need to do to better manage the long-term transitions that we've all been grappling with for many years, but also respond to the different types of shocks. And, digitalization and green have been transforming our labor markets and our approaches to economic development. Automation, for example, will likely change the skills needs, and roughly 1 out of every 2 jobs will have the green transition is being accelerated, including because of rising fuel prices, given the global context. And the big question is, where will those jobs be destroyed, and where will those new jobs be created, and what are the skills needed and the community assets needed in order to attract, retain, and develop those jobs? And also a lot of different trends that are changing just the character of our communities and our neighborhoods and our efforts for economic development, given the effects of demographic change, e-commerce, teleworking, environmental imperatives, all on the way that we live, work, produce, and consume. So a lot of big questions about whether we should be promoting more nearshoring, how to take advantage of the proximity economy, what kinds of changes in supply chain should we be expecting? And to confront all of this, we need different leadership models, and no one group has all of the answers, of course, but we here think that for, of course, local economic development, the private sector plays so many different important roles. In ways that go beyond turnover, job creation, and tax base, but playing a leadership role in public-private organizations, really attracting and retaining firms, helping to identify what makes places attractive, the important role of chambers of commerce and other entities providing business development support, helping to link small firms and entrepreneurs and large firms and value chains. And then, of course, the big, massive need to upskill and reskill to keep pace with all of these different changes. And so we're really excited to hear about the different models between Western Cape, South Africa, Philadelphia in the US, Quebec in Canada, and Malopolska region in Poland. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the floor to Jeff Finkel, a well-known international expert in local economic development, who's going to lead us through today's session and introduce our international panel. So Jeff, I hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Karen, and I appreciate you kicking this session off today. What I'm going to do, first, I plan to be out of the way as quickly as possible so we can take this great panel that has joined us today and give them as much time as possible. But I'm going to go through and I'm going to introduce them collectively at this point, and then we'll let each of them speak. So who's going to be our first speaker today is going to be Anne Bavard-Nevins. I've gotten to know Anne over the last couple of years, and she heads up an organization known as PIDC. She has been at PIDC for 15 years, and it is known as Philadelphia's Public-Private Economic Development Corporation. She's been president for the last 2.5 years, and before that, she helped run the Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City. She worked in the Clinton White House a number of years ago. And I must say, and I think Anne has heard me say this before, I view PIDC as one of the best practices in the country, in the United States, in the economic development space. I can't tell you the number of people that I have said, you need to talk to PIDC because they get it right. So Anne will be kicking it off. You will also hear today from Joanna Jakubuska-Wazinska. Joanna will be our last speaker today. She is the Deputy Director of the Department for Innovation and Business Development at the Malopolska Development Agency, effectively the region that Krakow, Poland is in. She's an economist by training. Since 2004, she's been working on the development of the region, implementing projects, etc. Now, they do not have public-private partnerships. And what I've asked Joanna to do is basically take the material that has been presented by the three previous speakers, and what can she look at? What questions would she have of these three other speakers as they look at public-private partnerships, private sector leadership in her region in Poland? Andrew Barein is our, Andrew Michael Barein is our, will be our second speaker today. He is the CEO of the Western Cape Economic Development Partnership. It helps leaders and institutions from different sectors, public, private, civil society, education, research, to work together to grow the local, metropolitan, and regional economy and to address complex system challenges. Andrew has an impressive resume, including work at the national government, city management, if I remember correctly, and economic development. He is also has a role as a fellow with the Brookings Institution, which is important in North America. Our third speaker will be Dan Silverman, and I just refer to Dan as Mr. FDI. He has been working on international trade or foreign direct investment for a number of years. As for most of his career, he's been Montreal-based, but has done most of his work in Canada as a consultant, representing the government of Ontario, the city of Toronto, the city of Montreal, and now Quebec. I am a little biased towards Dan because he served on the board of directors when I was CEO of the International Economic Development Council, and took the reins from a few years between the two of them from a past chair of IEDC, a gentleman by the name of Walt D'Alessio. So they are both from the family where I sat and worked for many years. So with that, Anne, do you mind kicking it off today?
Thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate the invitation to participate in this event. It's fantastic to be able to have the opportunity to be here this morning with such a global community. And as Jeff noted, my organization is based in Philadelphia in the United States. It's known as PIDC. And if you're wondering what that stands for, it is the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation. And while the I in our name for industrial continues to be very important to our mission of driving economic growth to every corner of Philadelphia, as it says, above my head, we have expanded our mission such that we really are much more broadly the economic development corporation for the entire city. For those that are not familiar with Philadelphia, we are about 1.6 million in population just within the city alone. We are housed within a greater Philadelphia region of about 6 million people that cuts across 3 states, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. Philadelphia is in Pennsylvania and is the largest city in that state. So our mission in terms of driving economic growth began in the late 1950s. And PIDC was established at that time as one of what I believe to be, one of the earliest public-private partnerships in the country. So we were founded at a time when Philadelphia's economy was heavily industrial, hence the I in our name, and have been both a driving force as well as a responder to the economic transitions that have happened globally, nationally, and certainly locally here in Philadelphia over those last 6+ decades. When I say public-private partnership, what I mean is that PIDC as an organization, stemming back to its founding, was created as a direct partnership between the city of Philadelphia, meaning the city local government, and the private sector through our regional chamber of commerce and the business leadership represented through that chamber. So again, we have had that governance structure in place since 1958, and it really continues, and I think continues to work effectively to this day, where we bring together in a way that I think very few, if any, other organizations can, the public sector and the resources of the public sector, along with the resources and capacity and perspective of the private market and the private sector and the businesses, nonprofit organizations, real estate developers that are seeking to invest and grow in our community and help to bridge gaps, both in terms of literal resources, so capital, land, sort of the tangible resources that can help spur economic growth within the city, but also the intangible, the knowledge, the networks, the connectivity, the understanding of how to advance something forward, how to get something done, navigate what can sometimes be complexity or bureaucracy, or at least perceived that way. And that's really what the heart of our organization is all about. So I'm delighted to be here today and to share with and to learn from my fellow panelists.
Thank you, Anne. And if anybody wants to know why there is a Navy ship behind Anne, as part of their leadership in their community, they inherited the Philadelphia Navy Yard, which was a former Navy base, and PIDC took the lead in redeveloping it and turning it around, cleaning it up, because most military bases have toxic waste on them. And it has become a real cornerstone for a lot of the cool things that are going on in Philadelphia. Our next speaker is Andrew Barein. And I must say, when Andrew and I communicated all by email, he said, well, we're a little different than some other economic development organizations. And I think that's what we've accomplished today, is each of these organizations are different, and they will all be talking about their private sector engagement in slightly different ways. So Andrew, do you want to share your thoughts today? Thank you.
Here we go. Jeff, thanks very much for that introduction. And yes, I think we are a slightly different animal. We don't directly do the more conventional trade and investment promotion in Cape Town and the Western Cape. There's a very fine agency that's been around for about 35 years called Westgrow that actually does that on behalf of the city and the provincial government. And they would be more recognizable, your familiar trade and investment and tourism promotion agency. What makes us different is that we were deliberately set up 10 years ago, and I've put a little bit more about us on the chat for those who want to follow up the detail. We were set up 10 years ago to be a collaborative intermediary organization. So we work with business, but not just business. We work with government, all three spheres of government. We work with communities, we work with civil society, and we work with knowledge and research organizations. So we're kind of in the middle. We're not a government agency, we're not a private sector think tank, we're not an academic and research organization, and we're not an NGO. We're in the middle. And we organize that in-between space to build relationships. We're a not-for-profit, public benefit organization. Curiously, we actually get funding mainly from the public sector, but we are independent of government to build those relationships in between the different sectors. And I guess, Jeff, you've referred to our purpose. We try and assist leaders and organizations and institutions based in the different sectors to help them work together to solve complex societal issues and complex problems in economic growth and development field, ultimately to try and improve the lives of our citizens in our region. Why do I say complex issues? Well, we find that in doing economic growth and development, often we are in a low trust environment. Communities don't trust business, business doesn't trust government, government doesn't know how to work with communities. And so there's often a polarized discourse with people speaking past each other. So trying to get people to speak a common language about the future of our city and region is one of our roles. We find there's a lot of volatility in our system. We're a developing society, high levels of unemployment, high levels of violence, not an easy territory to work in, not a stable environment. So a lot of variables, a lot of lack of certainty in terms of the future. So how do we build relationships to bring more certainty into the future? And we also experienced quite a lot of fragmented system governance, competing and overlapping mandates between government departments, hierarchical and rigid silos where people in government do good work, but they don't know how to work together. And so you're not getting collective impact from the public sector. Public sector is inward looking, doesn't really know how to deal well with the private sector, gets very impatient. And unfortunately, a lot of non-collaborative attitudes and behaviors in the system from all sectors. So just a little bit about, in specifically, Jeff, your second question, engaging the private sector. When we launched 2012, so 10 years ago, in fact, last week, we celebrated our 10th anniversary. Initially, we envisaged having a single partnership for the whole region with all the business organizations and business interests represented in that. And we were launched by 130 different organizations back 10 years ago. As we know, business is very diverse. It has conflicting and competing interests. Formal business, but a lot of informality, big business, but a lot of small and micro business. And the kind of economic spectrum spans from the private sector, but also runs very heavily through the community sector, focusing on livelihoods rather than job creation. So how do we span all of that? And as our premier said the other day, sometimes when you talk about organized business, it can be a little bit of an oxymoron. Business is not always organized well. So we shifted quite early on, Jeff, to involving business either in very specific themes where you can move quite quickly from dialogue to action, because that's what business wants. They get very impatient with long, drawn out conferences and forums and debates and things like that. That's not what they're there for. So we either involve them in specific themes that are specific, that are pertinent to what business needs to deal with. So, energy supply or improved water supply, particularly 3 or 4 years ago when we were going through a massive day zero drought, safety of business and communities, transport and mobility, urban regeneration and property development, agriculture and rural development. And we only, when we deal with those themes, only the business associations or organizations relevant to those themes are involved. So we don't try and have a mass meeting every time we engage. You get the right people in the room, have the dialogue, but move as quickly as possible based on a common agenda and joint action towards implementation. And business really responds very, very well to that. That's one of the things we've learned over the last 10, 20 years. The other way we involve business is on a space or geographic or area base. So in the town center or in the main street or in the neighborhood or in the industrial area or in the innovation hubs. So we have a thematic basis for engaging with business. And then we look at engaging and organizing and partnering with business on an area-based level. And Cape Town, fortunately now over the last 20 years, has developed 48 city improvement districts. So they do a lot of that partnering work on getting the basics in place, as we know, through business improvement districts and city improvement districts. The final point I would make is coming back to what is our relationship with destination marketing and the more traditional function of working with business. And it's a very important function. And as I said, that in our region is led by Wesgrow, and they do a very good job there. And that's your familiar trade, investment, sector promotion, tourism, research, film and media conventions and events. But alongside that sits what we'd call destination planning, management, and development. In other words, that gives the destination marketing people something to market, because you can't sell a region, you can't promote a region, you can't interest investors and business people or tourists to come and visit you if you just a very slick marketing agency and there's no substance behind it. And behind us lie a lot of difficult development challenges. And so sitting behind destination marketing, and this is where we come in, because we're looking at systems. We do 3 things. We look at systems performance, our water system, our energy system, our waste system, our food and nutrition system, our access and mobility system. That's the first set of activities. Secondly, how to build a more enabling and supportive environment. Can we get greater responsiveness and adaptiveness within the public sector to 1, business and market needs, 2, to community ideas and initiatives, and 3, to being more receptive to scientific data analysis and research. And there we go into the public sector and deal with these ridiculous silos and try and promote a more transversal approach, deal with lack of intergovernmental cooperation through a more intergovernmental partnering approach, deal with ability to try and work across boundaries, across jurisdictions, and look at functional regions rather than political territories and administrative territories and things like that, and try and change public sector organizational culture to be more outward focusing and more responsive and collaborative, and less inward focusing and just focusing upwards to the political mandates coming down from ruling parties and things like that. And then the third thing that we do, so it's systems performance, enabling and supportive environment, and then systems governance, collaborative decision-making, alignment and sequencing of planning and implementation, collaborative behaviors and relationships, so getting into culture change, capabilities to navigate complex development challenges and speak a common language, an ability to not just manage your portfolio, but also influence other people on how they spend their budgets and do their planning. So let me stop there, Jeff, because let's get into more of this stuff a little bit later on. Thanks.
Thank you very much. You made a great argument for product development. We're gonna turn this over to one of those big game hunters you were referring to a minute ago, and we all know that Dan could not do what he does without local economic developers making sure the product is ready for the companies that he's trying to recruit. So, Dan, do you want to share how you guys engaged with the private sector and how you're maybe different than what Andrew was talking about and what Anne was talking about?
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Jeff. Thanks everyone for having us, and bonjour tout le monde. I'm Dan Silverman. I'm the Vice President of Foreign Direct Investment at Investissement Québec International. So we are the primary economic development agency for the province of Quebec. And what that means is that we are responsible for foreign direct investment, for trade and export, and for a variety of other services in relating to economic development, but also we're the primary financing corporation for the province. So not only are we responsible for general economic development practices, but we're also, in more or less terms, a bank. So we run a number of the provincial financing programs, and we run our own programs. So we are a for-profit organization, except for my division is a cost center. We always say, why is my name always written in red? Because I'm a cost center and the rest of it's for profit. But it's really a great 1-2 punch because being the bank of the province, it helps us engage more and more with the private sector. So we're not only using our funds and our opportunities to attract foreign businesses, but we're using it to support local business and local development. So the province of Quebec has invested in innovation zones around the province, and we plan to announce a few more here a few weeks before an election. We've invested in sector strategies, not just in attracting sectors, but in advancing these sectors and helping to complete ecosystem value chains. And part of that means putting in infrastructure. So in the middle of Quebec, halfway between Quebec City and Montreal is a relatively, I guess I wouldn't say small, but a port and industrial park called Baie-Concours, where the government has invested millions of dollars to create one of the primary North American electric battery campuses to service not just Quebec and Canada, but the North American market in general. And you may have seen announcements with BASF and GM and POSCO in the past few weeks. On the flip side, we invest significantly in the life sciences ecosystem. And on Friday, Prime Minister Trudeau and Premier Legault announced Moderna opening their first vaccine manufacturing and R&D facility outside the United States, being in the Montreal region. So IQ plays a significant role in attracting those businesses, but in supporting the local ecosystem with the local players. And what that means is that not only are we working with the local economic development agencies, but we're working with the local private sector, because it's the private sector that are eventually going to put in the infrastructure. Yes, the public sector may pay for it, but the private sector is part of it. Our board at IQ is made up of private and public sector. So we obviously have a few deputy ministers or assistant deputy ministers on the board, but they also appoint private sector executives to our board of directors. In fact, we had a very famous Quebec comedian and also business and entrepreneur on our board for the past 2 years. So it's a very diverse board that we have, but it also proves how we need to work more, not just with our partners like Montreal International, Quebec International, Three Rivers, FDI, but also how we work with the municipalities and how we work with the private sector in each one of those markets. So as we build out our strategies, it's very inclusive of the private sector. And you all know across the globe, we're in a talent war. Everyone wants more talent. Everyone needs more talent. So every time you make an announcement of a foreign business coming in, the question is from the local businesses, are they going to take our talent? So we've put together with the Ministry of Immigration, the local economic development agencies such as Montreal International, Drummondville, and Quebec City, international talent attraction mandates, and working with the post-secondary educations to further develop international student attraction, but also to develop programs that are going to help expedite qualified talent for specific sectors that we have. So, there's no day where I don't think we work with the public sector or the private sector. During the 2.5 years of the pandemic, we shifted a lot of our resources with the Ministry of Economy and IQ into supporting businesses in Quebec. Probably over about $3 billion was given out as part of the financing corporation to keep doors open and support payroll. And that was really focused on identifying and working with public funds that we have, which is also private funds because we are for profit, and reinvesting that in the Quebec economy to keep jobs and to keep companies moving forward. I saw a question come in there pretty quickly. We are fully funded by the government, but we're also funded by our own profits. And one of the other things where we really engage differently than traditional economic development organizations is that because we are a bank, we have our own venture funds. So we will invest in equity in businesses. So this is where we really take the public sector and the private sector and really mix it up, where we will invest in equity in a project or in a business. So, we have a portfolio of probably $14 or $15 billion. And we've also invested, usually in that 5 to maybe 30% range in businesses. But that's where you kind of see a very different level of how you get government and private sector working together when you actually have government investing in private sector. So it's not every company in the world that wants that, nor do we want to invest in every company, but it is a significant advantage that we have that under the tutelage of our Senior Executive Vice President, Bisha No, we look very much at opportunities to invest in equity and invest in other funds to grow the economy of Quebec, but also help businesses that are going to have a presence here or are already here continue to grow. So it's very much, I would say, a collaborative approach that we have with the public and private sector. We work with both private corporations. We work with public in terms of Hydro-Quebec as a key partner of ours and the monopoly on hydroelectricity here in the province. And also the local economic development and regional economic development agencies that are partners of ours, because as Jeff said in his introduction, we need them to help set the table for us to bring in companies and be supportive. And part of that is ensuring we have the sites, the talent, the infrastructure in place, and the availability, the needs of these businesses. And the key examples are announcements that we've had over the past several months in the battery field and the life sciences field across the province in growing what we have, especially in aerospace. You can't do that without the private sector, and you can't do that without partners. So in a quick nutshell, that's kind of how we engage with the public and private sector. It's very different. I'd say the only two similar organizations that do this is Singapore EDB and to a certain extent Business France, but Business France doesn't have the banking and financing corporation embedded in it. It's a separate organization. Thank you very much.
So Dan, before I leave, before we go to Joanna, you work with Silverman at Montreal International. I would mention that Silverman used to be here in the OECD in the LEAD program. Can you tell us how you work with Silverman and the team at Montreal International?
Actually, I just wrote a letter of support for him and his team for the Greater Montreal Community Region as we're looking at identifying industrial sites and qualifying what industrial sites can be ready for investment or use. So we work quite closely. He works with the greater, so Montreal, you have Montreal International, which covers foreign direct investment, and then you have the CMM, which covers the entire metropolitan community. And so we're collaborating together on identifying opportunities to identify more sites. Montreal's an island. The CMM goes off island. So together with the Ministry of Economy and Innovation, Montreal International, the CMM, and other partners looking at where are sites, what's available, what zone are they, can they be rezoned, do we want them to be rezoned, do they have I'm the Anglophone who forgets English words sometimes. Do they have wetlands on them? What do those wetlands mean? How do we, how do we take them? We have a whole portion of the east side of Montreal, which is has Esso on it, Suncor on it, big former facilities that we want to, take and rehabilitate. How do we do that together? So we work public, private, municipal together to identify these sites, identify opportunities, and see where the low-hanging fruit is. But what's our 3-year, 5-year, 10-year strategy with all these sites? So we work hand in hand with them.
So my second comment was I thought it was interesting you had a comedian on your board, but I wanted to remind everybody that the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, was a comedian as well, and he's for many of us, he's our hero these days. So he's shown more backbone than any number of politicians that I think a bunch of us have run into in our lives. Joanna, it's great that you could be with us today, and as you and I talked, you guys don't have a big foothold in public-private partnerships yet. But you've heard 3 people share what they're doing. Maybe you can tell us what you guys currently do, and then maybe tee up some questions for Anne and Andrew and Dan.
First of all, thank you very much for your kindly invitation to this meeting. As I talked to Jeff, you already know that Małopolska Regional Development Agency, place I'm working just now, is placed in Poland, in the southern part of Poland, Małopolska, with capital Krakow. I'm working for Małopolska RDA because I decided to move from academic career, then through some industry. Then I decided to work for the region, and this is what I am doing from 2004. Our agency has a long story behind, as almost all of you. As you know, URADA in this year will celebrate 30th anniversary of their establishing, and my Małopolska RDA will celebrate 30 years of establishment in next year. So we have many experiences, but unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, because it's a new field, we have no experience in a public-private partnership yet. It's also a long story, because this is not new concept, but in a way, I believe that it's very promising and very good idea to develop our region, especially these public services. Up to now in Małopolska, we are working mainly with small and medium entrepreneurs. We try to help them at every stage of their activity. We offer different kind of support also from the very beginning. If you have only idea, you can come and work with us to establish a new company. And especially we are for innovative concept, we have seed capital, so it's typical high-risk capital to support this kind of activities, but also we are working with, let's say, very typical concept of business, and every of these people can come and get some kind of support from our side. Also, we are working with mature entrepreneurs. We trying to support them in a different way, offering loans and credits, but also we are offering them some services to help them to develop themselves. At this moment, we have a big project. Thanks to this project, entrepreneurs can get some money to start with new experiences, to learn more from different topics they really need in a given moment. This what is very important. We are not concentrate on to tell them what they ought to study, what kind of project, what kind of topic, what kind of theme they have to concentrate. They are totally free to choose the field of interest. And for instance, we have very fantastic, we have fantastic wait a second, forget the word. One of our entrepreneurs, she is working in IT industry, decided to spend our fund to develop two ladies to start a small kindergarten. Because they understand that this would keep their workers in her office, in her business, is problem with small children. So if you offer them support as a kindergarten, they will be working for you because they have, especially young people, would like to have their families, and of course you have to do something with your children. So it's a way of our support. We're also working with our entrepreneurs to help them in their import and export businesses. So we offer really wide variety of possibilities. We are collaborating also with local government, but in general, our activities is connected with supporting entrepreneurs. But I believe that for region development, this what is really important is to build very high quality services, public services, which let us live in a better way. And also nowadays, it's also hard time because of war, Ukraine and Russia. You know, Poland brings, to Poland come many people from Ukraine, and we also would like to help them to stay here in Poland, and we have to create the good way of living for them and let them live till the war ended. So our activities is really very wide, and I believe that this public-private sector collaboration may open new prospects, and it's very interesting for me to work with the cultural changes, because I believe it's important, because you know it's also the situation is also strong associated with our history. You know that for a long time, till the Second World War, we have been a socialist country, and then we change to another system. So people would like to start their private businesses, and they are not very open to collaborate with, let's say, government. So we need some kind of changes. So this what is very important for me, and this what I am listening very carefully to all speakers said about their experience. It's this how to get this private sector, what to do to bring them and make them interested in public-private partnership. Because theory is theory, you know, mutual benefits and so on, this blah, blah, blah. It's important, it's clear for me, but I think maybe you have some experiences and you may tell it just now. In which way you started with this public-private partnership? What was the main barrier, and in which way you broke this barrier to start people to believe that it's business as business, and of course it can be profitable. But the area of this business, it's a bit different than the previous one they used to do, but it's also important and it's good, and it's also profitable for them. Thank you.
So thank you, Joanna. Now, when you and I talked a couple of days ago, one of the things you said to me was you didn't have a lot of money to participate in public-private partnerships. And I'm going to ask in particular, Anne and then Andrew. Anne, you have neighborhoods that you need to invest in Philadelphia where the entrepreneurs don't have a lot of money. Can you maybe shed some light on how you do public-private partnerships in some of these low-income neighborhoods? And Andrew, I have not been to the Western Cape, but I assume there are places of haves and have-nots as well. And how do you, in your places that people have resources, those are probably easier than the places that have not. So Anne, do you want to take a stab at that, please?
Sure, absolutely. So, I described a little bit about Philadelphia in my introductory comments, but one of the things that's really important to talk about whenever we talk about our city is the fact that we currently have around a 25% poverty rate in Philadelphia. And so that is something that we need to be focused on and thinking about in every dimension of how we think about economic development. Andrew, I heard you talk about this similarly in some of your comments as well. And so, when we set out at the end of 2020, which was obviously a very challenging year with the height of the pandemic, also particularly here in the United States, a time of much greater reckoning around racial justice following the murder of George Floyd and everything that kind of followed from that within both globally, nationally, and certainly in our local communities in Philadelphia. And so we, in the beginning of 2021, adopted a set of strategic priorities, one of which was leadership in Philadelphia's equitable economic recovery, and specifically for PIDC to take a leading role in attracting both public and private capital to support our economic recovery. We really felt that it was important based on the skills and capacity that our organization has had throughout its history to take that on as a really critical role for us to play in the recovery, as well as hopefully as we now move into more of a growth phase. And then the second that is very interrelated was really focusing on the deployment of our resources across everything that we do, whether we're talking about lending and financing. And Dan, you made mention of being a bank. I would say similarly, we have certain of those qualities. We don't have any for-profit entities. We are all nonprofit or kind of quasi-government. But we really do a lot of financing and lending. So whether it's lending, real estate development, even contracting and procurement, thinking about how we use our own purchasing power, we've really centered how do we want to do that going forward in ways that more directly address the poverty in our city and racial equity. And so with that, with the idea of how do we then take a role in bringing together public and private capital, and why are we uniquely positioned to do that? I think part of it is the relative uniqueness of our governance structure. As I mentioned, PIDC as kind of the parent entity that I'm the president of, has a nonprofit governance structure that is comprised of public officials, so the city is directly represented, as well as private sector representatives. In addition to that entity, we also operate a municipal authority, which is a fully, governmental entity with a board appointed solely by the mayor of Philadelphia, but that is operated through a management contract with PIDC. So our staff and our team perform the services of that governmental entity. And then all the way on the other side, we have a purely private not-for-profit 501c3 organization, which is also a community development financial institution. So in the US, CDFIs are entities that are specifically designated by the federal government to be able to attract private capital in ways that can act and support small businesses, community development projects, and essentially do the types of investments that at least our current commercial banking sector and commercial marketplace are typically not set up to support. So that includes, Jeff, what you mentioned in terms of entrepreneurs that may have been historically underserved or locked out of access to capital systems and currently unable to successfully secure the financing that they may need to grow their business. That can include also all different types of community development projects that support neighborhoods, support the creation of jobs in those communities, support critical goods and services, healthcare, fresh food access, but those projects that often need some form of subsidy to be able to operate successfully. So the power, I think, of our organization and the public-private structure is the ability, essentially under one roof, to bring together public resources, whether that's grant dollars. We saw a lot more of that actually in the economic development in the small business space during the height of the pandemic than we have in many, many years and decades prior to that. But when the resources are available, that can be grants, that can be special tax credit programs, that can be other types of maybe low cost financing or financial incentives, tax exempt bonds. So we have the power to sort of bring together what the public sector has to offer, and that can kind of come in waves and is often limited relative to the need, but then be able to pair that very powerfully with the much larger scale, but maybe not necessarily often as subsidized or as targeted to the needs, the resources of the private market, and pull those in a way that we can package that together to deploy it to these small businesses, development projects, nonprofit organizations that have the needs in our community and help make those projects work. So that's a big part of what we do.
Thank you, Anne. And I would let everybody know that unfortunately, Anne's going to have to leave us in about 5 minutes. If anybody has any questions, they may want to put them in the chat if they are specifically to Anne. We will continue this session through for another half hour, and we will work with the remaining speakers who are, as you've already noticed, top-notch and should be able to handle any of the other questions. Andrew, do you want to tackle that same question?
If I'd start off by just kind of coming to the way we use the word partnership, because it actually means many different things under different circumstances, and it's not either or, but I would differentiate between, in a sense, your traditional, well-known public-private partnerships, which are effectively transactional relationships, where you're bringing in private financing for construction and infrastructure and even operating and managing and maintaining. And I wouldn't look to South Africa for good examples there. We have a very complex sort of regulatory system from our national treasury, which makes it very difficult to put those sort of PPPs together, unfortunately. But I think that I would also look at what I would call development and change partnerships, where you've got kind of shared risks and rewards between the public sector, the private sector, and say the community or the not-for-profit sector. And you have mutual accountability. So they're not so much transactional relationships, they're two-way relationships, focused on economic and societal benefit. And then I'd also differentiate between partnerships, the noun, and partnering, the verb. And we find people get a little bit stuck on the noun. When they come together, they always want to know, what's the governance structure? Am I represented on there? And you can talk about that for 9 months or 12 months and find you've done nothing. So we sort of try to switch it around and say, start with the action. Start by doing something together, partnering, the verb, and the governance structure, the partnership follows, rather than starting with the noun. Take action, pause, reflect, learn by doing, and then be able to adapt and adjust your strategy to respond in an adaptive way and build resilience in your neighborhood, in your city, in your region through that process, as opposed to the sort of traditional approach which promises delivering catalytic projects, which very seldom catalyze anything and are often not sustainable. So we prefer the small, more bottom-up stuff, working with communities, working with small businesses, working with informality. You know, many of our community structures are not run by government, they're run by unregistered, informal community organizations. How do we support them? How does an overregulated government sector transact with the informal economy that we have in our towns and cities? Just the examples I would give this, you know, to be practical about this. 4 years ago, we nearly ran out of water as a city, as Cape Town, through a terrible drought. And what we were able to do through a sort of slogan of connect, communicate, and collaborate, bring together the communities with the business and with government to reduce demand enough to stave off that crisis. And it was probably the greatest reduction in water demand that the world has ever seen, you know, over an 18-month period. So that worked. People collaborating around a common purpose. I think the second example I would give is in response to the food and nutrition crisis in poor and vulnerable communities in and around Cape Town, provoked by the COVID lockdown and a pandemic. Again, bringing together community organizations, civil society, business, farmers, and the public sector to organize a short-term food response, in other words, a food aid response for about 12 months, but then turning that into a longer-term food system program, where we are looking at how do we support local food and nutrition systems in the poorest communities that are delivered often by the private sector, but small and informal. And how do we work with them, and what support should government be giving to that? The other example I would give, which is a more conventional one, is at a little town near Cape Town. It's called Stellenbosch. Some of you may have had some wine from there. There's 11 landowners in a corridor that want to each develop their own parcels of land. And how do you do it in a collective way? How do you do it in a way that there's collective impact over the whole corridor, which brings in a sense, a historically deprived community called Kayamandi, so that everyone benefits from this corridor development. And that means working with the university, it's a university town, working with the city or the municipality, working with the big, powerful landowners, and working with the community, and getting that balance right. So those are just 3 examples I would give. Thanks, Jeff.
Great. So I believe Anne has now left. So one of the questions that Joanna posed in her presentation, and you talked about it a little bit, and in your initial presentation, Andrew, was how do you start to engage the private sector in an effective way? Are there 3, 4, 5 lessons learned? And Dan, I'm going to ask you this question immediately after Andrew has tackled it. You know, so Joanna wants to engage the private sector more in her region in Poland. What does she need to do it? And you know, is it ego? Is it economic return? Is it you know, the fact that they're given leadership? What would you do if you were in her shoes and wanted to start off engaging the private sector better?
So who convenes those conversations is very important. It's often contested, certainly in our neck of the woods. You know, if government calls private sector to a discussion, often it's politicians talking at the private sector, often waffling on a bit about government plans and, you know, visions and things like that. Private sector, after 1 hour, gets very impatient and says, you know, wasting my time, you know. And, you know, one of the lessons we've learned and that we work with all our partners is to say, talk once and listen twice. In other words, go there to listen and not just to try and sell your political vision or your government plans and things like that. If, on the other hand, the private sector invites government to their meetings, often government doesn't come prepared and doesn't want to engage in the detail or sends the wrong people. And so we take a lot of care through our organization, and we're not the only ones that do this. There are others that do this, to convene a safe space for a mutual conversation, a two-way conversation where government can really listen to what the private sector is saying. But also, but vice versa, private sector can also be quite arrogant, can show up and say, leave it to the private sector. We know how these things, we're better at managing things. And quite frankly, the private sector isn't always better at managing things, particularly when you're looking at issues of inclusive public policy. Private sector is often tone deaf when it comes to community needs. And so how do we bring all that together in a conversation that leads to joint action? And I think that who gets mandated to be in a sense, often the neutral convener is quite important to start off that conversation, particularly around contested terrains where there's contempt in the existing relationship, and you've got to break through that and really find each other.
Dan?
We do something in Quebec every year called I'll translate it, but the Forum des Filières. So it's the forum for foreign subsidiaries that gives them the opportunity to meet with and very much like Andrew's saying, have the politicians listen to them on what's needed in infrastructure, what's needed in talent, what's needed in programs, and we bring around 40 to 60 foreign subsidiaries together with the different ministers of economy, of environment, of finance, and kind of have a 2-day multiple roundtable discussion around that. The other way in engaging is we really engage through my colleague Marie-Ève Jean, who's the vice president of exports and taking an innovation side of things. Is engaging through exports, because exports creates growth. And when you speak to companies about helping them get into international markets and how to help them grow, you find out all their different pain points. They would all love to grow, but they need the talent to do it, or they need the funding to do it, or they need the innovation to do it. So we find there's a good combined approach in terms of government leading versus private sector leading. In a lot of our life sciences, or not life sciences, or a lot of our sector strategies, I'd like to say it's government led, but we know it's really private sector led, to get the private sector, key players in the private sector to sit down together to tell us what's needed and what they want. So you have to provide very many avenues. And I like what Andrew said. I'm a big proponent of you're born with 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And especially when we're sitting on our side of the public-private or public, you have to listen to what's being said. You don't have to implement it all, but you have to listen, because if you can find those common themes, that's what's going to help you make an impact and address the future. So in my understanding is creating an environment where public and private can be together, where private can be heard and public can listen. That's where I think we need to kind of find that mold. And that's really kind of what starts these small brush fires of ideas and innovation and collaboration. And we've done that not just on the export side, but on the buying local side, on the innovation side, on the productivity side. And that's helped us in Quebec kind of get to where we're going, rather than saying, here's what we think you need. It's more a matter of, from all the different sectors, tell us what you need. And we kind of catch the pinpoints of what the common theme is between everything.
So I'm going to lay out a hypothesis for you, and Andrew and Joanne, if you want to jump in as well. And my hypothesis is as follows. When we get private sector participation, leadership, cash in our economic development organizations, not necessarily as investors, but as they're going to help fund an economic development organization staffing, travel, hosting things. They take a leadership role as the chair of a board. They take a leadership role and pushing other people or bringing other people along. That they tend to come in a variety of categories. One, they're homegrown businesses. Their family has been in that community for years and years. They're proud of the community they're in. They have some resources or they have some leadership styles that are helpful, and they want to jump in. It's not necessarily a out of town business manager who's running the company. It is a family member or somebody truly committed to the community with their own dollars that gets in there. Or it's a large company who wants to take leadership roles in their community. They see that as part of their DNA and part of their responsibility. Or a company that has been helped through economic development, and they either want to repay or they want to pay it forward. Now, those are my categories. Dan, do you see other categories, or do you agree with any of the categories I've just laid out? And Andrew, I'll leave that to you. And then Joanna, is that helpful at all? So Dan?
I would tend to agree with your categories. I would also say there's, the category depends on the private sector as well, like the key industrial sector. But I think, the outlying one is just people who actually care, and it's not about the profit. It's not about the money. It's about the impact on the local economy and the growth and the future of a local economy. So whether that's the Quebec economy, whether that's a jurisdiction in Poland or South Africa. But I think, there's, I'm trying to remember the key word for it, but, there's a socio-political aspect of these things that I think is very important to some, that it's, if we don't fix it now, and you look at what's happening with people talking about CO2 emissions and climate change, if we don't fix it now and put up the fight now, it's our kids and our grandkids and our great grandkids that are going to pay for it. So I think there's that bucket as well. There's obviously there's the political side, there's the private side in each one of the categories you said, and then I think there's the social justice side or the socio-political piece of it. So completely agree with you, and I think we need to tap into each one of those in order for it to be successful. It can't just be one.
Yeah. Andrew?
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I mean, we've never found it difficult to involve the private sector. I mean, and by we, it's a not just the EDP, but other groups that we work with nationally. There's a national public-private growth initiative that's working closely with the presidency on an economic program at that level, usually the big corporates and the larger companies. And at a local level, the local businesses with community connections are always there and have always been there. Yes, they grumble a bit about government performance. They grumble a bit about the politicians. They're a little bit cynical and skeptical, about the state or the role of the public sector. But you can overcome that if you set up the right platforms and kind of always focus on taking action, not just talking about these sort of things. I suppose, Jeff, our social economic crisis is so grave, and our climate crisis is so grave in South Africa, in Cape Town. The private sector would be really out of touch if they weren't wanting to get involved. I think we've had more problem from some in the public sector side. There's a lot of politicians that don't have any background in the private sector, no real contact with the private sector, who are very doubtful about the private sector and see it as untransformed and as unrepresentative and as not sympathetic to communities. So we've got to do a lot of work in the government side and in the public sector side to bring them on board into partnerships with the private sector.
Joanne, do you have anything that you would like to add or ask of our speakers?
I am listening carefully this what we are talking, and my feeling is as usual. Every time you have to work very hard on every problem you are faced with, and it's clear for me. This what we are doing. Words are very important. Of course, you have to know what you are talking to whom. It's also clear for me. But I think that's a really important part of this PPP problem is a culture in given country and social potential in given country. So it's not easy answers, easy recipe how to solve the problem. But I think, for me, from my viewpoint, it's important to know as much as possible good practice. Because me, personally, I believe that the best way to show the people that something is possible is to show them that in other countries it was possible and it works. So I am not expect that my private sector don't want to earn money. They are existing thanks to this that they are earning money. So every activity have to be profitable. If they decided to work in public with public services, they can be good, they can be more effective with that than governmental sector, public sector. But it still doesn't mean that they are going to earn money. So it must be profitable. But I think this what I am feeling is main problem is a problem of breaking this social and cultural barrier to show them, to let them know, to let them believe that because it's usually a long horizon in this kind of activities we are working with. But it is what Andrew mentioned. It's not necessary to start from building big castle. You may start with a small building, and if this building appear, you can show we can do small building. So it's also possible because castle is nothing different than small building. It's just bigger. So if you are successful in a small story, it's quite possible that you are able to go with a big problem. So why not to start?
Thank you, Joanna. Anna Rubin from OECD wants put a question here that says, get the speaker's views on the new frontiers of economic development. What will change and what will stay the same? Dan, do you want to, and by the way, this will be the last question of the session today. After we've gone through the speakers and asked this question, I'm going to then give each of them 2 minutes to make some final comments, and then Karen McGuire is going to close out our session. So Dan, what do you think the new frontiers are, and then what's going to change and what will stay the same?
I think foreign direct investment and economic development has to evolve, especially with what we've seen in the last 2 years. Here at IQ, we've had 2 record-breaking years for foreign direct investment in the midst of a pandemic where probably about 18 months of that time, no one could set foot in the province of Quebec who wasn't from Canada. And so we've had to evolve and find new ways of marketing our jurisdictions and working with public and private sector businesses to attract more investment, create more jobs, and create more capital wealth in the economy. So I think the whole aspect of virtual economic development and virtual promotion is going to change, but I think the traditional service of economic development is going to remain the same. I think we're going to see a lot of economic development agencies morph into more marketing attraction and servicing on a reactive basis due to talent shortages. But I also think these economic development agencies are going to have to think internationally with working with limited resources, because so much of the public funds have gone into recovery. So, we're fortunate enough to have 33 delegations around the world. Not all economic development organizations have that presence in markets. So it's going to be an important, I guess, tandem of creating more with less, but making sure that customer service level maintains that high expectations that we all have.
Right. Andrew?
Jeff, I'd answer Anna's question by saying that before we even get to the new frontiers of economic development, just to make a point that in our neck of the woods, and I suspect yours as well, if I read my press reports right, economic growth and development strategies become very political and even ideological very quickly. They get very contested, very heated, very fractured, between trickle down or bottom up, role of government versus role of private sector, and we certainly go around and around and around between the sort of economy, the social and the environmental. And people kind of pull it this way and push it that way and find it very hard to have a model that's based on consensus that integrates, in a sense, the planetary limits to economic growth, the social basis of economic growth, and the space in between that for economic growth, and trying to get consensus just on indicators that go beyond GDP, which is, as we've seen, it's an important, but on its own, an inadequate basis for measuring progress in our society and in our planet. So these are contested things, and obviously then everyone's forecasts for the future tend to pull in different directions. So again, it's going back to what extent can we get some sort of societal consensus on where we want to go, and then and the notions of a just transition, for example, away from a high carbon economy have to be at the front and center of that. And just getting consensus amongst our different stakeholders in government, in the political parties, and in communities, let alone the private sector, is quite difficult. But that's our job. That's what we are there to try and do, because without that, we're just going to pull ourselves to pieces.
Joanna, do you want to add anything, and then also wrap up any final words that you want to share?
I think that what we have to be ready is changes. This what we'll be faced with, and of course, this what mentioned Daniel and Andrew. We have to adapt to this new situation which we are faced with, and for this what is coming. We have to remember about we have to remember that we are not able to do everything. We are working in a given circumstances. So we have to adapt it. We have to remember that we are not the last. I hope that we are not last people in the world. I believe that our children, our grandchildren and grandchildren will have also possibility to live in our earth. And I believe that by these changes, we are able to adapt our activities, economic activities also, first of all, to develop for us and to develop our future, and to develop our future coming part of our humanity.
Joanna, this will be your last opportunity to speak today. I want to thank you very much for your contribution today and representing Urata on this session. And I hope to meet you again in the future. Andrew, do you want to say some type of concluding remarks, what people maybe should take away from this conversation today?
Jeff, I would just say, firstly, thank you very much for this opportunity. The way we're going to deal with the challenges that we've faced in our cities and regions is to learn from each other. And I've really appreciated hearing my colleagues on the panel and reading some of the questions. And I hope we can continue. So, thanks to the OECD for putting these sort of platforms together, because local is important, local action, but can also be quite parochial. And I think that to be able to look broader and to listen to what people in other regions and other towns and cities are doing is just fantastic. So well done on your 40th anniversary for the LEAD program.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's been nice to meet you. I've appreciated your prompt responses to my emails. Dan, you're going to be our last speaker other than Karen, who's going to close it out here in a minute.
Great. Thanks very much. No, thank you everybody for having me. It's been a great opportunity to learn and collaborate with you all. I think on the sense, very similar to what Andrew said, working locally is also working globally. I'm a big believer in cross-border collaboration. So if anything that we said here for Quebec resonated with any of you, don't be shy to reach out and have those discussions. And I look forward to the opportunity to meet with many of you, but also with Jeff and Karen. Thank you so much, and look forward to collaborating with the OECD in the future and seeing how Quebec can help play a more pivotal role in helping to change the future. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Dan. I hope you feel better. Karen, do you want to close this out today?
Great. Thanks, Jeff. And thanks again to Anne, who was joining us earlier, Joanna, Dan, Andrew. First, I just want to say it's really interesting to hear about the different models and approaches. And I think it would be great when we can share a bit more about sort of what works in these different types of models. And we heard very much about how there are different cultural contexts for the different models that exist. And so trying to identify what are these transferable lessons from one model to the other, I think will be very valuable work that the OECD can do to sort of follow up on some of this discussion as well. I was very intrigued also by several speakers whose comments about, we're talking about working with, public, private, and then in some cases, civil society as well. Very intrigued about, the reminders that we have to speak quickly, speak the language of the person that we're talking to across the table, and also to really keep in mind, we had a couple of speakers talk about, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So speak once, listen twice. And I think that was a really important takeaway from these discussions when we're talking about, public-private collaboration and partnerships and where things work. We also heard a lot about you need to really focus on also some of these concrete wins and to engage the private sector when you think you will have one of those more quick and concrete wins. And I think also was mentioned you can still start with a small building. It doesn't have to be a castle, but that these are going to be very valuable in this public-private collaboration. I think also very interesting discussion about maybe some of the changing political and social factors that surround these public-private partnerships, including a greater call for inclusion and the challenge of doing so in an increasingly, in some countries, polarized area of dialogue. So the sort of neutral conveners and the types of people to convene with, in some cases, don't even have sort of formal legal structures. And so how to make sure that these convening processes are inclusive. And I think there's really a lot to think about in terms of this. How are we evolving going forward, and what are, is it more of the same, or are we changing the game here? And so I think this will be areas for future discussion. So just wanted to close with a couple of points. First, thanks again to everybody. For Andrew, who I think has been very active in the LEAD program historically over the years. So really thank you for coming in today and during this context of a 40th anniversary, and to some of the members of the LEAD committee and the LEAD forum, local development forum, who have been dialing in today, and to all of those from around the world. I saw examples coming from West Africa, from Turkey, from the US, from Europe. So really exciting to have this peer exchange that Andrew had mentioned, which is really at the heart of the local development forum. And so please feel free to share the fact that others can sign up to get in emails to join in on these different webinar discussions associated with local development issues, and we really hope to continue these different types of exchanges. And as a final note, I think they've put in the chat, but if you're interested in coming to Cork, Ireland in mid-June and participate live in person to have these kinds of talks where you can also chat on the side during coffee breaks, feel free to join us. And was mentioned, no registration fee, you just have to get yourself there and house and feed yourself, but we'd be happy to welcome as many of you as we can.
Thank you very much, Karen. I think that brings us to a complete end of this program. I want to thank everybody for joining us today and hope to see you at a future one. I know we are going to be doing one on retail, probably going to be sometime in June, and it will be looking at the economic development issues around retail, both what has happened to retail as people aren't returning to the office. It's going to be, what have all of these companies that deliver stuff to our doorsteps, what have they done to retail, and how are retailers re-equipping themselves in this difficult environment, and how are communities taking these empty retail spaces and trying to figure out how to reconfigure as a result. Thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a nice day.
Thank you. See you. Bye.